Hi everyone, good morning. Great to have you all on board of this session, and great to see you all in this round. I mean, it's still the virtual environment that we are living in for now 2 years already, but I think we are accommodating quite well. Some I see are sitting already in the office again, all by themselves. So great to have you. I mean, these days, open source is really everywhere, and just as Gerald and Johannes mentioned, um, it is an increasingly common tool to strengthen digital sovereignty. I mean, we have a whole lot of discussion around what is digital sovereignty. Is it only open source, or what are the different options that you can take for especially administration, but also private organization? But at the very end, if you talk about open source and the open source summit that we're having today, open source is 100% digital sovereignty from my point of view. So it's great to have the discussion today around how also governments and public administrations can use open source, adapt open source, and increase the adoption of it to get into this stage and to use it for their digital sovereignty. Just as mentioned, I mean, it is all coming from the buying power also of governments, as you could have read from Matsukato in the Entrepreneurial State and many others, how you should drive into becoming into a stage and really make something a force and to increase some technologies. So in this situation, open source technologies stand as a catalyst for change, as I would say. It is built-in digital sovereign. It is creating markets, as we will discuss also later on today. And of course, governments are facing major digital challenges at this moment. I mean, the digital gap in some European countries and also beyond is large, especially if you compare it to private organizations. And it is really a challenge to come up with these. And we will discuss today together with a panel consisting of leaders of the government and of course also industry participants with Frank together, what could be the different options and what is the discussion point at this way. So today we will focus on what are the opportunities and challenges for open source for public sector, and what is the role of open source ecosystem in European collaboration. But the main question will be, where does the public administration stand with open source, and how can we move forward quickly? So for the sake of time and the packed agenda that we're having today, I'll introduce the panelists only shortly before addressing the first questions. So if you're interested, please use your provider of choice to search for further terms and details on each of the persons which have outstanding CVs on their own. So Pia, you lead the Directorate for Digital Society and Information Technology in the Germany Federal Ministry of Interior and Community, and you're a member of the Board of Federal Ministry CIOs. So for Germany, I see digital sovereignty is a very important topic. In 2019, you started with a strategic market analysis that outlined the dependencies of the federal administration and especially the critical pain points that can result out of these. So why is open source for you an important component to increase control over one's own IT and strengthen digital sovereignty? You're still on mute. I'm sorry, Pia. No, it's in the Hopin on the.
I'm sorry, it's a beginner's fault. I'm sorry. So thank you very much, Patrick, for the invitation and for the question. And let me first say, yes, of course, strengthening digital sovereignty is a key essential for us. And we have to ensure information security and data protection. And we have to ensure the ability of public administration in Germany and in Europe to act in the long term. And therefore, of course, we have to retain the control of our own IT. That's a must. And that means we want to minimize the dependencies on technology providers significantly, difficult word. Therefore, we must show that there are alternatives which function in a secure way and in a manageable way. And we do this with the help of open source, open interfaces, and open standards. Thereby strengthening the possibility and ability of the public administrations to change between systems and to change between providers. And you might know that we have a new federal government in Germany. They stimulate the use of open source and open standards for public IT in their coalition treaty. So the topic of open source is even more politically important for us now. And for instance, we want to reach that the commissioning of IT development orders will be provided as open source in the future. future. Today, we are working on various topics. For example, we currently plan a Center for Digital Sovereignty to foster the needs-oriented development and implementation of open source in the German public administration, in the whole German public administration, not only in the federal administration level. We support the development of sovereign workplace together with currently 14 of the federal states, the Länder. You might know we are a federal organized nation. And the sovereign workplace, of course, is based on open source. And we have implemented a federal German cloud strategy which enables us to use applications secure and cross-cloud. And of course, all that also should be based on open source. And we foster a joint open source platform together with the Länder to share and reuse open source code of public administrations and co-create innovative solutions. So by relying on open standards and open source, we are strengthening our digital sovereignty in the long term, and we reduce the dependence on technology providers as we create opportunities for switching, increase the administration's ability to shape IT products, and also strengthen our influence on providers. And I think these all are main issues.
Thank you very much, Pia, and great initiatives that you're having on the board at the moment. So jumping over the Franco-Allemand friendship to Bastien. Bastien, you're the head of the Free Software Unit, which is France's open source program office, I would mention it, at the Interministerial Directorate for Digital Affairs in France. You are a free software interested man for already 20 years for now, already being a student in philosophy, and started then to become a developer and contributor to the GNU project. And in 2017, you jumped over the bridge to the French government and have dedicated yourself to the mission to reinforce free software in the French public sector. So great to have you, Bastien.
Hi.
I mean, hi. I mean, one can ask whether it's already too late for the public administration to invest in it and in open source and build up own capacities around open source. So, I mean, this is always an arguable question that you can ask at some point. Is it really still worth it? Is it still important? Or what is needed to drive the change towards openness, co-creation, and reuse within public administrations from your point of view?
Well, free software in the French public administration has been here for the last 20 years. And we've seen an increase in the familiarity with this topic in the administration and also in the members of the parliament, like thanks to the work of lobbying associations who were careful about user freedom and careful about what opportunities free software and open source create for the public sector in terms of transparency of our IT systems and a greater efficiency of the systems themselves. So today there was one turn in history in 2012 where the Prime Minister was encouraging all central administrations to use more open source and also encouraging the experts to talk together and to converge toward a selected list of free software. And now we are going one step further with this national action plan. And we not only continue to support this expert network that is very active in France, but we want to list all free software that is actually in use, and we want to publish case studies on how they are used so that administrations and local agencies can judge by themselves and report back about how the move to more open source has been key to their digital transformation.
Cool. Thank you, Bastien. So we're coming now to the industry side, jumping over from France and Germany. I mean, Frank, you study computer science. Many people in the open source community know you. You're the founder and CEO of Nextcloud, which is a great alternative from my point of view, especially for collaboration. And you're really trying to push for a decentralized alternative to US companies, of course, in that way. You're also a fellow of Open Forum Europe. You're the vice president of the BITME. I have to explain that. I think it's an association in Germany for SMEs, especially medium-sized entities in the IT industry. And you're an advisor to the United Nations regarding intellectual property and open source. So welcome, Frank. Great to have you. Despite calls for more digital sovereignty and open competition, and we now heard Pia and Bastien stating how France and Germany are pushing their agendas and are seeing their initiatives, public institutions often still choose other offerings, maybe from proprietary or other areas, so from dominant tech vendors mainly. What do you think? What is the significance and implications of this for open source companies, and how is it seen from your side? Do you still see an opportunity to amp that up?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really great to be here. Yeah, it's definitely interesting times at the moment. There are a lot of industry players trying to shape the future of digitalization, especially in the public sector. There is definitely a chance for open source companies like Nextcloud and many others. I mean, exists a huge ecosystem in Europe around open source software. What I find really interesting is basically the battle that is going on about words. I mean, the topic here is digital sovereignty. It's actually interesting that some well-known big IT company from Redmond just a few days ago announced that they're also launching a sovereign cloud offering in Europe, especially for the public sector, which is interesting because obviously everybody tries to redefine the words here, if this is really sovereign or not. I think it's really important that we all look into the specifics here, because something like digital sovereignty is just a word. The question is, what does it really mean? I mean, and I think it's really a good idea to test those offerings and compare them with each other. Is something that is offered by the big hyperscalers and big tech is really the same than what can be offered by open source, by the open source industry in Europe. I mean, for example, just looking at the vendor login, is it possible to move away from these proprietary cloud services and switch to a different vendor, or is there a strong vendor login? With open source software, there is no vendor login, and there's a free choice of the governments and of the users to move to the service they want. But with the big cloud services, there is a vendor login, so this is not digital sovereignty. Is there protection against surveillance and espionage? I mean, open source software, you can look inside the code and you can verify that there are no backdoors. If you're just a customer of proprietary cloud services, you cannot do that. So that's another requirement for digital sovereignty. If you don't really know what you're using, what happens with your data, then this is not digital sovereignty. Then what about the open source ecosystem in Europe? I mean, is Europe just becoming a consumer, a customer of cloud services hosted somewhere else? Or do we also invest in our own ecosystem? Do we want to have software players here in Europe, which creates like innovation and interesting products, or are we just becoming consumers of non-sovereign cloud services that are hosted somewhere else? And then, of course, from a big picture, I mean, do we really want to live in a world where basically all these IT services for all governments, but also for normal citizens, are provided by 3 or 4 or 5 big monopolistic companies or not? Or do we really want to have an open market, an open ecosystem, and real alternatives? And I think these are checkpoints that need to be checked for services, and then if a service, if an offering is really providing digital sovereignty or not. And I think open source based software and services and companies can provide all these benefits for the users and for the public sector.
Cool, thank you, Frank. With that, we have touched the first topic. I think we have framed that there are initiatives in the countries at the moment going on to push open source agenda. They see the point that you can gain control over own IT through that. And we've heard, of course, also from Frank that the race is still on, but we have to act now, and we have to be also critical and put certain measures from other players under scrutiny in some way. I think this is exactly what will be done also in countries, as from what I heard and know, especially in Germany, of course. The BMI and the others are really putting those kind of things really on the radar, and are really watching this very strongly. I mean, we will now touch a second topic to really elaborate on the main challenges and strategies pursued to leverage open source. And Natalia, great to have you also on board. I see the European flag in the background, so that already means where you're sitting and where you're working at. You're the Director for Digital Services in the Directorate General for Informatics, DG Digit, in the European Commission. Before, you were responsible for the ISA Square program, which provides interoperability solutions for public administration, businesses, and citizens. Great to have you, Natalia.
Thank you.
So in 2020, the European Commission published their internal strategy, which you called Think Open, with the goal to encourage and leverage open source principles in software development inside the Commission. So what are the main challenges the Commission faced since then, and maybe overcame also already? And how's the transformation along working, especially around culture? Of course, I guess it's not the easiest one to move everyone into that direction.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and really very happy. All what I have heard already, it's really great. So thanks for giving the opportunity. Indeed, I would like to start with this culture change in the European Commission, and you have heard our commissioner before. This is not something new. We are using open source for already 20 years, but it was kind of in a niche, and it was not something that was well understood by everybody. Also, Bastien told about how the knowledge of using open source is spread throughout the whole public administration. So we were confronted exactly to that challenge. And there is where we tried, with the motto of Think Open, to apply the principles of open source internally to the public services that the Commission is implementing. These cover different topics, and it starts also with the procurement. This has also been mentioned, and we know the rules we have to apply as a public administration for procurement. So we have to indeed change the mindset, not only from the IT department, but also from the procurement department, to have this integrated in the rules that we put forward. This has been done. We have been working on that for quite some time, and we keep this in mind. To help on this change in the mindset and to spread better the principles of openness of open source, we also created the OSPO. This has been really a big step forward, because we have let's say, institutionalized the fact of using open source. So it was not something only been happening, but we now recognize it. And we have also an office that is promoting it internally and externally. And I think this is a big step forward in the understanding of the open source. But I would like to also mention other challenges that we were having. And is being public administration, it was quite challenging on how we could participate and contribute to the open source communities outside the European Commission. So we have rules, we have copyright, or let's say intellectual property rules that apply to public administration. And this created quite an administrative burden to reach out to the level to be able to share or to contribute to the open source community. So for that, in May last year, we changed our rules so that we made it much easier to be able to either public our own developments as open source, but also to be able to contribute to them. So I think this has also been a big step forward, because this will also make it easier on having this mindset of contributing. So it's not only, this was one question also mentioned, are we only consumers or are we actors of the open source? And this is also something where we are working to change, to really become actors of the open source in Europe. And this has also another thing I would like to mention, the last one, I will stop there, is on the mindset of I'm working on my own project. And I think that this is also something that we have changed by sharing and opening the source code internally in the Commission has changed, because anybody can contribute also for the code development inside. So we don't need to have these project assignments. I mean, they happen also, but the mindset is there to be much more open. I will come back later to other topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. And I think you are mentioning some very important points. I mean, beside maybe also that competencies are not spread equally between private and public organizations at the moment. And I also see the case of it being a dominant factor for public administration sometimes to stay in the comfort zone somehow, and to choose maybe easier solutions. Yeah, it's exactly like you mentioned. If you're stepping into open source, it should not only be just taking open source and then being dependent from another vendor, just like you mentioned, yeah, but to be a two-way contributor also in some way and be in a dialogue and really work together on this, because then you're really getting, I see the discussion in the comment section, or also a little bit, I'm screening a little bit, only then you're really getting into a kind of sovereign discussion or a really sovereign solution. Yeah, open source by itself doesn't mean it's totally sovereign, probably. But most of the times, I would guess it is because you have the transparency, you have some other advocacy, just as Gerald said already in his keynote just beforehand. And I've seen also Fiona is here, who's leading the efforts on the initiative of the Sovereign Tech Fund in Germany, which is a good example also on another topic that, Bastien, I would like to discuss with you shortly, because, I mean, reality is showing us that almost all modern applications, also the proprietary ones, are based in the very end also on open source components. So in the lights of Log4j and other stuff that we've seen in the past, how can components be maintained in the long term to prevent open source vulnerabilities in these terms?
Yes, so here there are three, the topic is threefold. Like there is maintenance, security, and funding. So I'm not assuming that each of them is enough to solve the other sides of this topic. But if you take just funding, this is a big topic in open source for at least the last 10 years, and Heartbleed and Log4j raised this topic again. And we strongly believe that we need to fund open source at the source, whether it's a citizen, whether it's a community, whether it's a company, whether it's a public agency. We need to fund open source at the source and make things sustainable in that way. So our strategy here would be in three perhaps overlapping steps. One is to educate, the other one is to experiment, and the last one is to engage. So educate, we need to bring awareness about the dependencies that we use in our public sector system. So that's what we started to do on code.gouv.fr, listing more than 2,000 dependencies and the word I use. And we continue to discuss these dependencies. We create discussions with developers that know them and that could assess whether they are fragile or not. Experiment. There is lots of ideas and solutions out there in the open source community at large. There is, for example, this sustainoss.org forum where people are discussing it. And we know for sure that we are not ready to pick up one solution and invest everything in this solution. But what we are doing in the free software unit in France is that we are thinking about these solutions, and we will start to take action now, experimenting with some funding solutions, probably using the knowledge of the developers that are directly acquainted to these solutions. And engage is, we need to be transparent about these efforts that the public sector can do about funding some key open source software. We also need to make visible some contributions that are already done. And I'm happy to say that in the free software unit, we are recruiting someone that will be dedicated to this job of making contributions visible, whether they are code contribution or financial contribution. So, and there is this last topic of engagement and commitment. So what is the country sitting at the Linux Foundation board? How do we engage in large foundation and in large strategic institutions that play a key role in your lives?
Thank you, Bastian. I think you're totally right. It's especially if you're looking at the funding mechanisms and how public procurement is running. This is also a huge topic that you could do a full session on. I would probably guess, especially on the European public procurement laws and other stuff. I mean, I've been doing now consulting for many years, switching now over to a public sector role, but especially in the last years when I have really engaged with open source topics, I saw how complicated it could be to change also that ways, and that policies. Because if you're doing it product wise, it's pretty easy. Yeah, you're comparing the product, the features, you're doing a tender, and then you're seeing what result comes out, and then you're buying these licenses. Yeah. So this really has to make changes in so many ways, and this change has to be driven somehow. And I mean, the European Commission, we have already heard it in France, are going the way of OSPOs, and we have heard from Johannes Hahn in his welcome address that he mentioned the efforts of Pia and her team around the Center for Digital Sovereignty. Pia, I mean, this is great stuff that you're pushing forward there now already. So what is from your point of view, the key role of such an OSPO, and how can it help to promote open source? And maybe you can tell us, when will it be available? No.
Oh, well, I'm sure it will help a lot. So we're currently working on it to establish such a Center for Digital Sovereignty of Public Administrations. And we call it CENDIS, like the abbreviation for it. It shall become a cross-level organization based on an expanded idea of an OSPO. And our work is based on a series of past resolutions as well as on the coalition treaty of the current government. And CENDIS will be a central office for the coordination and promotion of open source in the public administration for whole Germany. The different levels of the administration should be included. And the aim of this office is to promote sustainable open source applications for the federal, the state, and the local governments, and to make them usable for all of these administrations. And to fulfill this, CENDIS is to form a link between the public administration and the open source ecosystem. And I think this is a really important task. Perhaps in contrast to a traditional industry OSPO, CENDIS is then also to initiate and control the further development of open source solutions, design, service, and support concepts, and to make open source products available on a central open source platform. And this platform has already been developed and is currently established as a pilot. And despite these adaptations of the traditional OSPO concept, of course, we want a smooth cooperation with other OSPOs, and we want to be part of the innovation which results in the cooperation between OSPOs and in the knowledge transfer. And we would therefore be very pleased to see the establishment of further OSPOs in the European Union, and we would be happy to be part of this then. So that's
cool. Thank you, Pia. And I have also read through the comments that, I mean, we have also efforts in Portugal. Anna is here from the UN. So I think many public administration organizations are now pushing this on their agendas because they see this change has to be driven by some organization or some central point somehow. So I think this is exactly going in that direction. So we've already touched the next topic, to be honest. This is a really informed panel, I would guess. As we all see, we are maybe more on the same side of the matter, but still have to be critical. So we will now talk around the importance of an active ecosystem and open source policies that maybe have to set into place. For example, one could be public money, public code, as already mentioned by FSFE, that is pushed forward, an important campaign from my point of view. And Frank, how do you see it? What kind of sector policy or actions needs to be taken in order to facilitate capacity building and the use of open source? What would you like to see? What is the 3 or 5 points that you would ask Pia and the others in the panel to take action?
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's actually a great question. There are many things that should be done. You already mentioned public money, public code, which means that money that comes from the citizens should also benefit the citizens, which is should be quite obvious. There's a lot more training, for example, needed in schools and universities around the concepts and development of open source software. This has a lot of potential. This is an area that is really huge for the innovation power of Europe of the future. I think there are some funding programs around open source startups that could be helpful. But I actually wanted to stress one specific area here, which from my perspective is especially important. And that's around policies that make sure that we have an equal playing field here between the relatively small open source companies in Europe and the big hyperscalers somewhere else. I mean, if you look at other areas of the economy, I mean, we have policies and laws that make sure that you can take your phone number from one service provider to another. It's a good policy from the EU to make sure that we have a fair competition here. We have the same regulations in lots of areas that, I don't know, every car can consume fuel from different gas stations, and we have regulations around food to make sure that they are comparable and healthy and so on. And I think we really need a few more regulations and laws to make sure that the software industry has a chance to compete. For example, there should be a requirement that consumers and customers have the chance to move from one software product or one service to another, like no vendor login, open standards, and so on. I think if there would be laws and policies around that, it is part in the GDPR, but it's not strong enough, in my opinion. That needs a little bit more regulations in these areas to make sure that we're all on the same playing field here. There should be a requirement, I think, there should be a policy that users and consumers and customers of software as a service has the chance to audit the software independently, to look inside if there are any backdoors, what's really happening with the data. I mean, there are transparency regulations in the food industry and other areas, and I think transparency is also something that should be in policies in software. That there should be policies to make sure that services and software can be provided by more than one company. This is also something that helps to build a real fair, broader software ecosystem in Germany. I mean, there are a lot of things that can be done to make sure that we have a fair, equal playing field, which then creates a lively ecosystem around open source software in Europe.
What do you think, if I may ask, Frank? We talked about the German coalition treaty and that there's already open source at least included in there. Are you fine with what is in there, or what is it about now? What have to be done? What is the first thing that you would like to see?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the coalition treaty, and there are some good things in it. I mean, public money, public code is basically in there in different words, obviously. That's a good thing. Regarding the infrastructure for the public sector, for the government, there it's a bit, it's not really clear. The wording there in the coalition treaty is multi-cloud strategy, which is not completely clear what it means. We'll see the next few months. I mean, I read multi-cloud strategy as that there will be different vendors with different products, which then should be somehow interoperable with no vendor login, open standards, and so on. If this is the case, then this would be a good thing. But this is still an open question. We'll see, and we have to fight a little bit more in this area to make sure that this is a real open source strategy here.
I think this is exactly what the summit is also about. And I saw Pia on the top right corner nodding. So from what I know, this is exactly what at least Pia and her team read into the meaning of this treaty. Yeah? Okay, we will come to the final topic for the sake of time. I'm sorry, we are so packed, and I would be able to discuss with you indeed many of the topics that we touched by now. The last topic would be around a kind of what is European network and collaboration. I mean, we found out, or OFE and Fraunhofer fortunately found out in their open source impact study, that it would be good to set up also a kind of European network of governmental units around open source and the mechanisms, of course, to learn from each other, to build critical size also. And we know, of course, by the sheer principles of open source, that collaboration is required to really come to innovation. And this is the only winning strategy, probably, to solve the quest that we discussed today. And in the comments, I saw a frenzy discussion again around the topic of what is digital sovereignty and how do we define it. So I will state it for today on that side of the page. But I think we all would agree that we need collaboration to really get to a certain point on which we would be fine with. So, Natalia, what do you think? You put so much emphasis on collaborative power of open source. How important and how do you drive cross-border collaboration on your own or personally to promote the development of open source technologies?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, collaboration is key, and like we have seen it with the examples here in Germany and France, where they are indeed collaborating within their own countries. And for already quite a number of years, we have the OSOR community that I'm sure most of you are part of it, where the main objective was at least to look around what was going on and to be able to share. So it didn't go much more than that, but at least was this sharing of information and projects. Now we are looking to one step further, and I think this goes very well with what the different countries are doing, which is to really put together and make sure that we can have the resources shared. We can have kind of a catalog of the solutions or the source code that the public administrations are using. I think that by being together, the different member states, and I think there the European Commission can play the role of putting everybody together, is to have bigger impact, because I think that there is already a lot of efforts being done in the different countries, but to have this really impacting and having this really recognized, if we put it at European level, I think that we can have it much better. This will help on many topics that have been discussed. Sovereignty is one, but also on the security that was mentioned, and also how we can, instead of reinventing the wheel each time, we can already learn and go faster in the next steps, because I think this is also important. If each public administration needs to go through the whole learning curve to get to the usage of open source, this will be very long. If we put all that together and we share this, we will accelerate the impact and usage of open source in the European public administration sphere.
Thank you, Natalia. So for the sake of time, I have to cut a little bit here, but I will try, Bastien, to improvise together with you to combine my last question with your closing statement, if that's all right with you. Yeah, sure. I will try to put on a resume now, so everyone can do a short sentence. What would be his final thought, or what should stay in the heads of the participants and the audience of this session, and what is your main message? So, Bastien, what do you think? Maybe you get 2 sentences. So first, What else would you expect from the from Europe and or the European Union and European collaboration? And the second, what will be your resume of the session?
Yeah, so when you think about big technical changes in the past history, it has always been about collaboration. The electricity, communication networks, highway, and so on. There was always collaboration and public sector efforts and public sector coordination. So we need to push that. We were taught to believe that software was something that runs on personal computers and that the invisible hand of the market could smooth things, but it doesn't work. We need to fund things wisely and work hand in hand with the European countries. So I welcome this idea of a network of OSPO because that's the way we can seize opportunities of collaboration, both at the policy level and the very operational level. And my hope is that European values such as user freedom and transparency will get stronger thanks to these efforts. And the excellence of the research sector should be sustained by this collaborative and European effort. So that would be my hope. And I think we are going in the right direction. And free software is about passion. That's something that we have on top of other industry sector, and this passion is about getting together. So I'm really glad we're moving forward.
Cool, Bastien. Thank you very much, and thank you for participating in the panel.
Thanks to you.
What would be your final thought?
My final thought, well, the OSPO, I want to mention, and we will use the OSPO not only for transformative power of open source, but also to foster the European open source ecosystem, which we think is really important. That's it.
Thank you, Pia. Frank.
Very, very brief. I just want to stress how important this is. Software and digitalization, this is the future of our society. That's the future of our economy in Europe. That's the future of our public administration. That's the future of everything. I think it's so strategically important that we make the right decisions now, because this really influences how Europe looks like in 20, 30 years.
Thank you, Frank. And the last words go to Brussels. Natalia.
Thank you. First, thank you for this super interesting discussion. And I would like just to insist on the open source goes beyond the tools or the hardware. It is a mindset. And I think this is key to bring innovation to the public sector and help the public administrations to offer much better citizen-centric services.
Cool. Thank you, Natalia. And thank you for the whole panel. This was a great discussion. And I'm sending now back from Berlin to the studios of the OFE to Paula. Thank you very much and have a very good day. Enjoy.